The Kentucky autumn sun was slowly slipping over the horizon, painting the shooting range in golden tones. Merritt Holbrook adjusted his protective headphones and took a deep breath. He wasn't a regular at these events. The annual Lexington shooting competition had attracted him more as a sponsor than as a participant. His construction company had contributed a decent amount of money to the organization, and now he felt obligated to attend. It was then that he first saw her. Tallulah Prescott stood out among the other participants, not only for her grace, but for the unwavering confidence in her every move. Her long red hair was gathered into a tight bun, and her dark green shooting jacket perfectly emphasized her slender figure. "Beautiful technique," murmured Barton Whitmore, owner of the local gun store, who was standing nearby. "Tallulah is one of the best shooting instructors in the state. They say she grew up in a family of hereditary hunters somewhere in the Cumberland Mountains." Merritt watched her methodically hit target after target. Each movement was honed like clockwork. After the final shot, she turned and their gazes met. Her whiskey-colored eyes seemed almost transparent in the sunlight. Toward evening, at the awards ceremony, Merritt plucked up the courage to approach her. Tallulah held the silver winner's trophy and smiled that special smile that would later haunt his nightmares. "Terrific performance," he said, extending his hand. Merritt Holbrook. Tallulah Prescott. Her handshake was firm and confident. "Thank you for organizing the tournament. It's long overdue to bring some fresh blood into the local community." They talked for several hours that evening. Tallulah proved to be a natural storyteller. Her stories of hunting in the Kentucky mountains were mesmerizing. She spoke of stalking prey with the same passion that others speak of love. Merritt caught her every word, fascinated not so much by the content as by the hypnotic authority with which she spoke. Later, walking her to her car, a black SUV with gun mounts, Merritt realized he was lost. He'd seen plenty of women in his 32 years, but none of them radiated such magnetic power as Tallulah Prescott. "How about dinner sometime?" he asked, trying to keep his voice sounding casual. She smiled, pulling a business card from her jacket pocket. "Why not? I'm just recruiting a group for private shooting lessons. You could use some technique improvement." Getting into his Lexus, Merritt couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way the sun played in her hair, the imperious grace of her movements, the enigmatic half-smile. He didn't know then that this meeting would be the beginning of the end, that less than a year would pass, and he would be standing over her body, clutching the hunting rifle she had taught him to use. In the meantime, the fall evening enveloped Lexington in soft twilight, and the air was filled with the smell of gunpowder and the anticipation of new love. The winter in Kentucky had been unusually mild, and Merritt spent every weekend at the range under Tallulah's instruction, and his marksmanship had improved considerably. But shooting was only an excuse to meet. After class, they would sit for hours at Johnny's, a small bar where Tallulah would talk about her hunting adventures, and Merritt would share his plans to expand his construction business. By February, they were living together in his spacious home on the outskirts of Lexington. Tallulah brought a special atmosphere to his bachelor pad. Hunting trophies were everywhere. His gun collection took pride of place in his study, and her black SUV now stood in the garage next to his Lexus. "She came into my life like a whirlwind," Merritt shared with Bart Whitmore after stopping by his gun store one day to pick up some new ammunition. Bart looked at him strangely over his glasses. "Tallulah knows how to woo men. Be careful, boy." But Merritt only waved away the warning. He was fascinated by his red-haired huntress. Her independence, passion for life, and natural charisma intoxicated him. Even her sudden absences on business seemed only part of her free-spirited nature. He proposed in March, during their hunting trip together in the Cumberland Mountains. Tallulah accepted the white diamond ring as naturally as she held the gun, confidently and without emotion. The wedding preparations took 2 months. Tallulah insisted on a modest ceremony, rejecting the idea of a lavish celebration. "Only the closest people," she said, and Merritt agreed, though he was surprised by the lack of relatives on her side. "I'm an orphan," she explained succinctly. "Grew up in foster care in the mountains. We lost touch a long time ago." The wedding, held in an ancient chapel on the outskirts of town, was attended by no more than 20 guests. Tallulah was resplendent in a simple white dress that emphasized her fiery hair. After the ceremony, Bart Whitmore lingered longer than the other guests. "I've known Tallulah longer than anyone else here," he said, taking Merritt aside. "She's a special woman, but sometimes what makes a person special can be dangerous." Merritt ignored the hint again. He was too happy to notice the warning signs. For example, the strange conversation he'd overheard between Tallulah and an unknown man in the parking lot after the wedding. "Everything's going according to plan," she was saying. "Don't worry, honey. Soon we'll be able to—" Noticing Merritt, she quickly ended the conversation. "Just an old friend congratulating me on my wedding," she explained with that charming smile that always disarmed him. They spent their honeymoon at a hunting lodge in the mountains. Tallulah taught him how to track deer, recognize animal tracks, and feel the rhythm of the forest. In the evenings, they sat by the fireplace, drinking whiskey and making plans for the future. Merritt felt like the happiest man on earth. But sometimes, waking up in the middle of the night, he found his wife doing something strange. She was sitting by the window with a telephone, talking quietly to someone. When she noticed his awakening, she always found a plausible explanation. Just checking the weather forecast for tomorrow's hunt, or checking with clients about shooting lessons. On the last night of their honeymoon, Merritt awoke to the sound of the door opening. Tallulah returned an hour later, smelling of woods and gunpowder. "Couldn't sleep, decided to shoot some cans," she said, climbing into bed. In the morning, he found the fresh footprints of 2 pairs of boots on the porch, but he kept silent. Tallulah was his wife, the love of his life. He believed that whatever secrets she kept, their love was stronger than any secrets. How bitterly wrong he was. The first month of married life flew by like a dream. Merritt plunged headlong into work on a new project, the construction of a luxury apartment complex in the suburbs of Lexington. Tallulah continued to give shooting lessons, though her schedule was now more flexible. "The benefits of private practice," she explained when she could unexpectedly cancel a class or reschedule it. Their evenings together were filled with comfort and warmth. Tallulah was an excellent hostess. Her venison roast was legendary among the friends she often invited over for dinner. All of these friends were Merritt's acquaintances, though. Tallulah kept her social circle separate from her family life. In the early fall, strange things began to happen. One morning, waking up earlier than usual, Merritt found his wife not in bed. He found her in the study. She had hurriedly slammed her laptop shut at his appearance. "Just checking email," she said, but her voice sounded strained. The phone calls had increased in frequency. Tallulah always went out into the garden or garage to talk, and she answered evasively, "Club business, honey," or discussing the new training program. One weekend, they went to their favorite hunting lodge in the mountains. In the evening, while preparing dinner, Merritt heard Tallulah talking on the phone on the porch. "No, can't talk right now. Yes, everything's going according to plan. The money is on its way. No, he doesn't suspect anything." When she returned, she smelled of cigarettes, though Tallulah always said she didn't smoke. "Who were you talking to?" Merritt asked, trying to keep his voice sounding casual. "Oh, it's Jane from the shooting club. We were discussing the upcoming competition." She walked over and kissed him on the cheek. That smells so good. You're becoming quite the chef." But something had changed. Merritt began to notice details that had previously escaped his attention, like the way Tallulah always kept her cell phone to herself, even in the shower, or the strange bills from motels in neighboring towns that he'd accidentally found in the glove compartment of her car. One night he was awakened by the sound of an engine. Looking out the window, he saw Tallulah getting into her SUV. The clock read 3 in the morning. She returned 2 hours later, smelling of men's cologne. "Couldn't sleep? Went shooting," she said, noticing he was awake. "You know it helps me relax." Merritt nodded, pretending to believe it. But something inside him snapped. He began following her movements, recording the times she was away, listening to her phone conversations. He searched her office in her absence but found nothing suspicious. Just phone bills with unfamiliar numbers and a few pictures of Tallulah with various men at a shooting competition. "You've gotten kind of tense," she remarked over dinner. Maybe we should spend more time together. Go hunting this weekend?" Merritt had agreed, but now her every word, every gesture made him doubtful. He loved his wife, but every day he felt more acutely that Tallulah was hiding something, and that something was far more serious than the usual marital secrets. On their last evening together, they sat by the fireplace in the hunting lodge. Tallulah was cleaning her favorite gun, an old Remington she said she'd grown up with. Her movements were smooth, confident, like a predator before a leap. "You know what the beauty of hunting is?" she said without raising her eyes. "You have to be patient. You wait for the right moment. And when the target is in the crosshairs," she clicked the bolt, "all you have to do is pull the trigger." Merritt stared at her and thought that perhaps all this time he himself had been the prey rather than the hunter. Private investigator Matt Salinger shook his head as he looked over the materials he had gathered. "Mr. Holbrook, there's something wrong with your wife. Tallulah Prescott seems to have come out of nowhere 5 years ago. Before that, nothing. No school records, no birth certificate, no tax returns." Merritt sat in the detective's unremarkable downtown Lexington office, where he'd come under the pretense of a business meeting. His last doubts vanished when he found a letter in his mailbox from the bank addressed to Tallulah Richardson. "There's something else." Donovan pulled out a folder of photographs. "Your wife meets with these men on a regular basis." The pictures showed Tallulah entering various motels with 3 different companions. One is James Richardson, a successful realtor from Louisville. The second is Michael Forrest, owner of a chain of car dealerships. The third has not yet been identified. Merritt felt nausea coming up to his throat. "Keep watching," he said, writing a check. That evening he stopped by Bart Whitmore's gun store. The old man was wiping down the display case when Merritt entered. "I've been waiting for you to show up," Bart said without turning around. "Have a seat. We need to talk." They settled down in the back room among the ammo crates. Bart pulled out a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses. "I should have told you sooner," he began, pouring the whiskey. But who would have believed the old man? Tallulah first showed up here 5 years ago. She called herself Tallulah Richardson then and was married to James Richardson. "What happened to him?" "Hunting accident. Officially a fatal wound from an accidental gunshot. Tallulah took out a big insurance policy and disappeared. A year later, she came back as Tallulah Forrest, Michael Forrest's wife." Merritt clenched the glass so that his knuckles turned white. "And what happened to him?" "Drowned while fishing, another insurance claim, another disappearance." Bart took a sip. "Then there was a third husband, Robert Kane, crashed in the mountains while they were out hunting. Again, a big insurance payout. Why didn't you say anything?" "There's no proof. Only the old gunsmith's suspicions. But when I saw her with you, history began to repeat itself." Merritt remembered how Tallulah had insisted on taking out a large sum of insurance right after the wedding, how she'd taught him how to handle a gun, always correcting his stance so that a shot could be fatal. "Do you have any paperwork? Anything specific?" Bart nodded and pulled out a tattered folder. "Newspaper clippings, old photos, copies of insurance policies. I've been collecting this for years, but no one wanted to listen. She's too good at covering her tracks." Looking through the materials, Merritt felt reality slipping away from him. The photos were of his Tallulah, different hairstyles, different last names, but always with the same predatory smile. "She's preparing a new hunt," Bart said. "Be careful. Don't drink anything she offers. Don't go hunting with her. And most of all, don't let her know you know." When Merritt returned home, Tallulah met him at the door. "Where have you been, honey? I was worried." "Got held up at work," he lied, looking into her clear, whiskey-colored eyes. She smiled and reached up to kiss him. He smelled the scent of gunpowder from her hair. "I made your favorite roast," she said, and opened a bottle of that special wine. Merritt looked at the table set, at the glasses of dark red wine, at his beautiful, deadly wife, and realized the hunt was on. Only this time, the prey was not her. It was a cool October evening when Merritt received the last report from Matt Salinger. The documents the detective had obtained left no doubt. Tallulah had methodically destroyed her husbands, turning their deaths into a source of income. 3 insurance payouts, 3 accidents, 3 new beginnings. New. That night, She suggested we go to the hunting lodge for the weekend. It's been a long time since we've hunted together, honey. I've missed our walks in the woods. Merritt agreed. He stowed his gear in the trunk, including the old Remington she'd given him for their wedding anniversary. All the way to the cabin, Tallulah was unaccustomedly silent, only occasionally glancing at her husband with a slight smile. In the evening, after dinner, she pulled out a bottle of whiskey. "Here's to us," she said, holding out the glass to him. Merritt pretended to drink as he watched her gracefully settle into a chair by the fireplace. "You know, I've always admired your insight," she began. "You figured it out a long time ago, didn't you? About James and Michael and Robert?" Merritt froze. There wasn't a shadow of remorse in her voice, only cold curiosity. "Why?" he asked. "The money is only part of the reason." She stroked the butt of the gun resting in her lap. "The main thing is the hunt. Tracking prey, gaining trust, waiting for the right moment. It's more intoxicating than any whiskey." "And I was the next target? You proved more difficult than the others. Smarter, more careful." She stood up, continuing to stroke her rifle, and that made the hunt especially interesting. At that moment, the lights in the cabin went out. There was the sound of falling glass, followed by a thud, and then a deafening gunshot that shattered the silence of the night. An hour later, the gamekeeper, who was making his usual evening rounds, noticed the headlights at the hunting lodge. When he came closer, he saw the open door and footprints on the rain-damp ground. A terrible discovery awaited him inside the lodge. Meanwhile, a black SUV was driving slowly down the dark road leading to Lexington. The rain was intensifying, washing away all traces of the previous evening. Detective Sloan McAllister had arrived on the scene at dawn. The rain had stopped, leaving behind damp air and blurred tracks around the hunting cabin. Yellow police tape fluttered in the morning wind. "What do we got?" he asked his partner, Detective Reed Calloway, who had already had a chance to talk to the gamekeeper. "Female, early 30s, gunshot wound to the chest. Body was discovered by Huntsman Thompson around midnight. Identified as Tallulah Holbrook, local shooting instructor. Married to Merritt Holbrook, owner of a construction company." McAllister pulled on latex gloves and entered the cabin. The forensics guys were already finishing their work. The heavy odor of gunpowder and blood hung in the air. 2 overturned glasses on the floor, a broken whiskey bottle, an extinguished fireplace. And in the middle of it all, the body of a red-haired woman. "Where's the husband?" McAllister asked, surveying the scene. "Haven't found him yet. His cell phone is disconnected. He's not home. Patrols are checking all roads within a 50-mile radius." McAllister walked over to the fireplace. There was a picture on the shelf, Tallulah and Merritt at their wedding, both smiling. "When did they get married?" "About a year ago. According to the neighbors, the perfect couple. He's a successful businessman. She's a professional hunter and instructor. Lived in the suburbs of Lexington." "What do ballistics say?" Calloway pulled out a notebook. "Shot at close range. Weapon is a Remington hunting rifle, found at the scene. Fingerprints wiped off." A CSI approached the detectives. "Sir, we found something interesting. There are traces of a potent sleeping pill in the whiskey glass." McAllister nodded. "So someone was planning a murder. The question is, who did who?" They stepped out onto the porch. Maintenance personnel were photographing tire tracks on the soaked ground. "Interview the owner of the gun store, one Bart Whitmore," McAllister ordered. "According to the paperwork, he's the one who sold that Remington to Mrs. Holbrook 6 months ago." "On my way to see him," Calloway replied. "What about the private detective?" "What detective?" "Matt Salinger. His business card was found in the victim's wallet." McAllister looked thoughtfully at the mountains surrounding the cabin. "Get in touch with him, and run a background check on Mrs. Holbrook. Something tells me we'll find a lot of interesting things there." By evening, the first results of the investigation were on McAllister's desk. The forensic report, the gamekeeper's statement, the victim's cell phone records, and a photograph 3 pairs of happy newlyweds. All of them were of her, Tallulah. Only the last names were different. "Looks like this is going to be a tough case," the detective muttered, lighting a cigarette and looking out at the city below. Somewhere out there, among the lights of Lexington, lurked a man who knew the truth about what had happened at the hunting lodge last night. "I've got something interesting." Reed Calloway placed a thick folder on McAllister's desk. It had been a week since the murder at the hunting lodge, and the investigation was beginning to take unexpected turns. Tallulah Holbrook, née Prescott, that's just her last name, Calloway fanning the documents. She's been married 3 times in the last 5 years. Each marriage ended tragically, and each time she received a large insurance payout. McAllister scrutinized the photos and documents. "Tell me more about it." First husband was James Richardson, a realtor from Louisville. Died hunting 3 years ago. Accidental headshot. $2 million in insurance. The second is Michael Forrest, car dealership owner. Drowned while fishing. $3 million in insurance. Third, Robert Kane, investment broker. Crashed in the mountains while hunting. $4 million in insurance. And accidents everywhere? Exactly. The police found no crime in each case. Perfectly planned accidents. McAllister rose and walked over to the evidence board. "What about our Mr. Holbrook? $5 million insurance policy, taken out right after the wedding. And here's the interesting thing. We found accounts in 3 different banks. There's about $1 million in each one. Money from previous insurance policies? Looks like it, but that's not all." Calloway pulled out the phone records. In the week before the murder, Tallulah called all 3 insurance companies. Then she contacted a private investigator. "Salinger?" "Yes, we interviewed him yesterday. He admitted that Tallulah hired him to spy on her husband, wanted to prove his infidelity." McAllister hummed. "Setting the stage for another accident?" "Possibly, but Salinger told something else. Merritt Holbrook hired him too, wanted to find out his wife's past." A young officer entered the office with a new folder of documents. "Sir, forensic results on the sleeping pills from the glass. It's a rare drug, prescription only, and we have the pharmacy where it was purchased." McAllister looked over the report. "Who's the buyer?" "That's the catch. The prescription is in the name of Tallulah Holbrook, but the pharmacist recognized Merritt from the photo. He bought the drug the day before the murder." "What about the gun store owner?" Calloway pulled out a notebook. "Bart Whitmore turned out to be very talkative, says he tried to warn Holbrook. He's got a whole collection of newspaper clippings about the strange deaths of Tallulah's previous husbands. He even tried going to the police, but without evidence, the case wouldn't budge." McAllister walked to the window. The sun was setting over the horizon, coloring the Lexington sky blood red. "So what do we have? A serial money hunter, 3 mysterious deaths, millions in bank accounts, and a husband who discovers the truth and buys sleeping pills, but who tried to kill who that night?" "There's one more thing." Calloway put the last document on the table. "We found a draft of Tallulah's new will. She was going to rewrite the whole thing to some Gregory Pierce. The date of drafting is 3 days before she died." "Gregory Pierce? Who's that?" "We don't know yet, but his number was the last number Tallulah called the day she died." McAllister returned to the table and began poring over the crime scene photos. 2 glasses of whiskey, 1 with sleeping pills, lights out, a gunshot in the dark. Someone carefully planned this murder. The question is, who beat who to the punch? And where is Merritt Holbrook now? Wanted. All the airports and train stations have gotten his picture. But something tells me he's closer than we think. Evening was descending on the city. Only a desk lamp burned in the detective's office, illuminating the spread of photos and documents, the pieces of the puzzle they had to put together. Somewhere among those papers lurked the truth about what had happened at the hunting lodge that rainy night. "Check all the connections of this Gregory Pierce," McAllister ordered, "and pull up all the files on previous deaths. We may have missed something." "Already working on it," Calloway nodded, gathering up the paperwork. "You know what's odd? On all previous occasions, Tallulah has held up flawlessly. Not a single mistake, not a single clue. And then all of a sudden there are so many traces. Maybe she's gotten sloppy, or..." McAllister looked thoughtfully at the photograph of the smiling, red-haired woman. Or someone was smarter than the huntress. Gregory Pierce's appearance at the Lexington police station was an unexpected turn in the investigation. Tallulah's lover had come to the detectives himself after learning of her death from the newspapers. His testimony brought new clarity to the case. Their affair lasted about 6 months. and Tallulah was planning to divorce, Merritt Pierce's alibi on the night of the murder was confirmed. He really was in Cincinnati. About the will in his favor, judging by the results of polygraph, he really did not know. The financial investigation yielded some surprising results. A week before her death, Tallulah had transferred virtually all of her funds to the account of Bart Whitmore, a gun store owner, a man who allegedly tried to warn Merritt of the danger. Further investigation revealed that Whitmore was a longtime friend of Tallulah's family, the only person who had known her since childhood. Ballistics testing revealed a partial fingerprint on the murder weapon that did not belong to either Tallulah or Merritt. In parallel, a second vehicle spotted by the gamekeeper on the night of the murder, a dark SUV that looked like Holbrook's car, surfaced. The same SUV was registered in Whitmore's name. The chronology of events that night didn't add up. The Holbrooks arrived at the cabin around 8 in the evening. At 9:15, Tallulah made her final call to Gregory Pierce. At 10:45, a neighboring gamekeeper heard a gunshot. At 11:10, a dark SUV left the area. The body was discovered at 1:30 in the morning. But ATM cameras captured Merritt Holbrook in Lexington at 11 p.m., withdrawing cash. It could have been a pre-planned operation to create an alibi, but it could also mean he was not involved in the murder. The discovery of Tallulah's second cell phone was a turning point in the investigation. The correspondence on the day of the murder indicated a pre-planned crime, and the second person involved in the correspondence was identified as Bart Whitmore. When police arrived at the gun store, Whitmore had already fled. His packed suitcases and a ticket to Mexico were discovered in his home. He was immediately put on the wanted list. The case took an unexpected turn. Tallulah, an experienced hunter of husbands and their fortunes, seemed to have fallen victim to another's hunt. It remained to find Merritt Holbrook, dead or alive, to put the pieces of this dark puzzle together. Merritt Holbrook's body was found in the third week of the investigation. He was lying in the trunk of his Lexus, abandoned in the long-term parking lot of the Cincinnati airport. 2 shots to the back of the head, hands bound. The ME puts the time of death hours before Tallulah's murder. This discovery turned the whole investigation upside down. McAllister spent a sleepless night reviewing the case file. By morning, a new version of events lay on his desk, supported by evidence that had previously seemed contradictory. Among Whitmore's belongings taken from his home were old photographs. A very young Bart with the Prescott family. On the back of one photo is inscribed, "Bart and Eliza, engaged." Eliza was Tallulah's mother, who had died under mysterious circumstances 25 years ago. Her husband was found guilty of her death and died in prison. Whitmore's diary was found in the gun store safe. The yellowed pages told a story of obsession and revenge. He loved Elise, but she chose someone else. Whitmore spent years watching her daughter, guiding her, teaching her. He's the one who introduced Tallulah to her first husband. He also helped cover his tracks after every accident. New testimony from a motel owner on the outskirts of Lexington. Tallulah regularly met Whitmore there. Employees heard them arguing. One day, a maid witnessed a particularly fierce argument. "You belong to me. I created you. I taught you everything," shouted Whitmore. Gradually, the picture of what had happened began to become clear. Whitmore had manipulated Tallulah for years, using her as an instrument of revenge against a society that he felt had taken the love of his life from him. He molded her into the perfect predator. But one thing he didn't take into account was that Tallulah inherited not only her mother's beauty, but also her strength of character. Marriage to Merritt was supposed to be just another surgery, but something went wrong. Tallulah actually fell in love. She began planning a new life with Gregory Pierce. Whitmore, when he found out, was furious. Phone records show that Whitmore met with Merritt on the day of the murder, probably told him the truth about his wife's past, showed him the evidence, but instead of gratitude, he was threatened with exposure. Merritt decided to go to the police. McAllister reconstructed the events of the fateful evening. Whitmore killed Merritt in Cincinnati. Then, using his cell phone, sent Tallulah a text message to meet him at the hunting lodge. She arrived, expecting to see her husband. At 10:45, a gunshot rang out. The killer staged the argument between the couple, leaving evidence pointing to Merritt. Perfect plan, except for a chance find in the trunk of the Lexus. Bank records show Tallulah transferred the money to Whitmore under duress. She knew he'd kill her, so she left a trail. The last text message was her way of creating evidence against her killer. In her jacket pocket, they found a flash drive with a full history of her relationship with Whitmore, including confessions to the murders of her previous husbands. She was preparing to turn herself into the police and expose her puppeteer. It wasn't just a story about murder. It was a story of control, obsession, and revenge, stretching back through the decades. A story of a woman who tried to break free from a vicious cycle, but didn't make it. Whitmore was apprehended at the Mexican border. When arrested, he did not resist, only smiled and repeated Elise's name. They found a shotgun in his car, the same gun that killed both Merritt and Tallulah. Detective McAllister closed the case file. Outside the window it was raining, just like the night of the murder. Somewhere in the police archives would now be the story of how the huntress became prey, and love turned into an obsession that destroyed everyone involved. The circle is closed. The final shot rang out. The courtroom was silent as Bart Whitmore stood up for his last word. His trial had lasted only 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming. A double murder, years of manipulation, a history of morbid obsession stretching back through decades. He spoke for over an hour about his love for Elise Prescott, how he raised her daughter to be the perfect tool for revenge, how he planned every murder, every accident, how he couldn't let Tallulah start a new life. The sentence was expected, life in prison without parole. After the trial, McAllister sat in his office for a long time, poring over photographs. Young Eliza Prescott, looking so much like her daughter. Tallulah with each of her husbands, the same smile, different last names. Merritt Holbrook, the only one who really loved her and paid for it with his life. The ATM surveillance footage turned out to be Whitmore's last-ditch effort. He used Merritt's card after his death, creating a false alibi. The perfect plan was derailed by an accident when a parking attendant noticed a strange odor coming from the trunk of the Lexus. An unfinished letter was found in Tallulah's house. She was going to confess everything, tell her life story, write about how Whitmore had turned her into a killer, how he had manipulated her guilt and gratitude, how she'd finally found the strength to break free of that vicious cycle by loving Merritt. But she was too late. Her maker couldn't let her lose control. Gregory Pierce left Lexington after the trial. Sent McAllister a short letter. She wanted to start a new life. She just didn't have time. Bart Whitmore continued to write letters to Eliza in prison. The prison psychiatrist noted that he was living in his reality, where it was still 1999, and he could still change the past. Detective McAllister finished his report late that night. Outside his office window, the lights of Lexington flickered. Somewhere out there, among those lights, once lived a red-haired woman who dreamed of freedom. A woman who had learned to hunt, but had become prey herself. On the last page of the report, he wrote, "Case closed. Sometimes the scariest monsters are those who call themselves our saviors, and the most dangerous cage is the one we mistake for home." In the morning, the case file will be filed away, but Tallulah Holbrook's story will haunt Detective McAllister for a long time to come. A story of how love can turn into obsession and caring into a death trap. The rain outside the window had finally stopped. Somewhere far away in the mountains stood an empty hunting lodge, holding the secret of the last hunt. A hunt in which there were no winners, only victims,